welcome to part 3 in the 4-part series AS has been doing this year, God, Where Are You in Culture? So tonight we have a great all-star panel of Biola professors. Let's give them a round of applause, pre-round of applause. We're going to be discussing Dr. Tim Muehlhoff's new book, I Beg to Differ. So we're going to bring him up in just a second, but before we do, we're going to play a little game. For all the comm students in the audience, I want you to make a quick list in your head of all the words you think Dr. Muehlhoff might say. So just a quick mental list, okay? And then I want you to give double points if any of those words were Noreen, Julia Wood, Campus Crusade for Christ, or Family Life Marriage Conference. So he has his PhD in marital communication from UNC Chapel Hill. Please welcome Dr. Tim Muehlhoff.
Holy cow. Well, as Julia Wood would say, hello. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. It's so much fun being here at Biola with some great friends that you're going to meet in a minute. People I greatly respect on a project I think is really, really important. So I want to give you a little bit of a backstory of how this book came to be. It really did come after watching a bunch of television programs that you all watch as much as I do and how crazy it all seems. So I want to show you 2 clips very quickly of kind of what generated my idea of this book. And the first one is Bill O'Reilly and Geraldo having a conversation. And let's just listen to a bit of it. Okay, so by the way, that was the highlight of the conversation, is what you just saw. So Deborah Tannen calls that the argument culture, that today we're losing the ability to talk to each other. 2 communication scholars had a really interesting idea. Things have gotten so bad today in how we talk about politics, religion, issues about sexuality, that it's gotten so hostile. What if Abe Lincoln actually ran for president today? What would an attack ad sound like against Abe Lincoln? So these 2 comm scholars created an attack ad focusing on Abraham Lincoln. Listen to this. So here's what I think happens. We watch that. That is the backdrop of American dialogue today. So when we talk about same-sex marriage, when we talk about differences in religion, when we talk about immigration, when we talk about anything, that's the backdrop. I think we watch that and we start to get gun-shy after a while. We're like, well, I don't want conversations to deteriorate into that. So we start to make the topics that we talk about smaller and smaller and smaller. And it affects us not when we talk about social issues, it actually affects us when we talk about interpersonal issues. So what happens is we don't want to get in arguments with people. So what we do is we think wrongly that I just won't talk about it. Right? I have a problem with you, but I'm not going to bring it up because I don't want that to happen. My goodness, if Honest Abe gets attacked, I'm going to get attacked for voicing my opinion. We make the wrong assumption that we think we can have latent conflict, all these emotions in us, and it's fine because I'm not going to share that with you. So in other words, I can be mad at my parents, I could be mad at my roommate, I could be mad at my spouse or the person I'm dating, but I don't share that because I don't want it to deteriorate into what they were doing. And we wrongly assume that if I'm just not outwardly upset with you, then it's okay. But what Dr. Grace will share a little bit about tonight that we've often talked about is something called emotional contagion, which means just like you have a cold, right, when you walk into a room, it's very hard to control where those germs go. They just kind of spread out. Well, understand that psychologists and communication scholars believe that you can't do that with your emotions. You can't hold your emotions in. They literally leak out and affect everybody around you. We call that emotional contagion. A very interesting study was done where 2 individuals were asked to watch a person giving a performance and then rank them. And after they ranked them, they went into a room. Now, one person is part of the study. That person is told, I want you to sit in the same room with that person. You're not allowed to speak to each other. And I want you to think continual negative thoughts about the person doing the performance, but you're not allowed to say anything. Afterwards, they're brought back into the room. They're asked to re-rank that person, and the person that was negative brings down the person that was positive in his or her scoring, just by sitting in the same room. So Paul is so wise to say in the Bible, listen, you need to deal with your anger before the sun goes down, because it will literally not only give the devil a foothold, it will spread and affect everybody around you. So this book is about how do you have the really hard conversations. How do you have conversations with people that you might have had a conversation in the past, it didn't go well, so now you're kind of stuffing it, but understand that's bleeding out and affecting the relationship in a lot of different ways, okay? So where do we get advice on what to do? I literally started this book about 15 years ago when I did a study of the book of Proverbs and came across one proverb that said this: when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. So I love the realism of that verse. People are still going to be your enemies. They're still going to disagree with you. But is it possible that you can communicate in such a way that you could still live at peace with that particular person? My study comes from 4 different questions that I think we need to ask in sequence when you're having a really difficult conversation with a person. First question, what does this person believe? Proverbs 18:13 says, it is folly and shame to you to speak before listening. So the very first question we ask is, what does this person believe? Second question, why do these beliefs seem right to that person? Third, where do we agree? And then the fourth question is, based on everything that I just learned, what is the one thing I should say to this person at this particular moment? Now, for the sake of tonight, all we're going to do is focus on the second question, which I think is one of the most important questions. What does this person believe? Why does this person believe? And it's based on Proverbs 14:12. There is a way that seems right to a person. The Harvard Negotiation Project says the biggest mistake we make in communication is we only trade conclusions with each other. We don't share the history of our conclusion. Like, how did you get to that conclusion? How did that ever become a conviction in your life? We never stop to ask that. We only trade convictions and trade conclusions with each other. Steve Jobs, a great American inventor, impossible to work with. He got fired by the company that he created because it was impossible to work with. So if you're trying to have a discussion with Steve Jobs, it would be really good to know why he was so committed to perfectionism. A perfectionism that literally drove people away from him. One biographer who was given access to him right before Steve Jobs died made this really interesting observation. The central trauma of his life, Steve Jobs, after all, was being given up for adoption by his parents. And now he's being kicked out of his second family, Apple, the company he founded. A close friend once speculated to me that Steve's drive came from a deep desire to prove that his parents were wrong to give him up. A desire, in short, to be loved, or more precisely, a desire to prove that he was somebody worth loving. The fact that his birth parents gave him up produced in him a perfectionism that was lethal, but it would be so good to know that's where the perfectionism comes from. A feeling of wanting to prove his birth parents, you were wrong to give me up. History of our convictions. Carol Gillian, a feminist scholar, says you cannot take a life out of history. Every one of you has a history. All your convictions, all your beliefs, they didn't just pop into being. There's actually a story behind your convictions. Question number 2 of the model is, I want to get the history of your convictions. Why do you believe so passionately about this particular issue? I think one of the ways we can find out how people have arrived at the present is to find out who has influenced you the most. Right? What has influenced your thinking the most on any particular topic? What great information to get from a person. So very quickly, significant individuals really have impacted your thinking. Who has shaped your thinking when it comes to sexuality? Who has shaped your thinking when it comes to God, or a conviction that lateness is something to be avoided at all costs? It'd be very important to understand that people have really affected your perception of life, your self-identity, and even your esteem, and I need to find out who has influenced your thinking. It could be a book, a person, a movie, something like that. In one study, individuals identified being more hurt by the opinions of an acquaintance they had recently met than of someone who knew them more intimately or had a longer relational history. So a significant other is a person that you've given the power to shape your thinking. Really good in a conversation to find out the people that have influenced you or the events. Soren Kierkegaard, some of you have read him, a fascinating author who writes about alienation from God. Kierkegaard's really hard to understand, unfortunately. A man wrote a book about Kierkegaard, and he said, you can't understand Kierkegaard without understanding 4 key relationships that have shaped his life. First relationship, Kierkegaard adored his father, even though he was very strict, until one day his father sat the whole family down and confessed to some sexual sin that had happened years ago in the past. It totally destroyed Kierkegaard's relationship with his dad, and he was estranged from his dad the rest of his life. Second, Kierkegaard was engaged to a woman, and 1 month before the wedding wanted to call off the wedding, but was afraid that it would negatively affect her reputation. So he got this crazy idea that he went around town acting like an idiot. He acted like a buffoon so that people would understand and feel good for Regina that now they weren't getting married. It worked, by the way. Everybody was fooled except Regina, who believed it was an act, but now he was isolated from his friends. A hostile editor had a very public quarrel with Kierkegaard about his writings, and so he felt publicly attacked all the time. A beloved bishop, a man that mentored him, died very suddenly. So you wonder why Kierkegaard is fascinated by alienation. As you look at each one of those, he feels alienated all the time. So to get that background information about a Steve Jobs or a Kierkegaard is very important when you're going to discuss an issue with a person. So ask these kind of questions. And I wish we had time we could do this. If you had to make a list of people that have influenced you most, who would be first on your list? And you can't pick Jesus, right? Who would be top on your list if you had to write that name down? By the way, Muehlhoff is M-U-E-H, two F's. Who has influenced your thinking most concerning this issue that we're talking about? Are there any books or authors that have shaped your thinking? I mean, in the communication department, we legally are obligated to quote C.S. Lewis once every lecture. The Bible department may have the Bible, we have C.S. Lewis. Okay, so how about your family of origin? Oh my goodness, your family has developed how you've seen the world. It's so good before you marry a person, absolutely go see their family of origin. You'll see a lot about that person. They grew up giving you definitions, your family, right? We call these constitutive rules. A constitutive rule defines what counts as what within a family. You grow up with those rules. This is what counts as affection. This is what counts as family time. This is what counts as connectedness, right? Interesting. By the way, we're teaching this class on relationships Thursday night, the Graces, the Tonnesses, and the Muehlhoffs, and we had this interesting comment about television. The Tonnesses have never had a television. The Graces have flirted with a television. The Muehlhoffs watch it like crazy. Okay, so interesting that my kids and myself have been shaped by that. Television has been very influential in our perspective. Respect. So what counts as respect? When you're talking to a person, that's a constitutive rule. There's no right answer. What counts as disrespect when you're talking to a person? What's family time? Television off, playing a board game, or watching television? Masculinity. What counts as masculinity in your house? Oh my goodness. My dad would tell us to work it out. Me and my 2 older brothers go downstairs and work it out, which meant you're going to get beat up. One of you is going to get beat up, okay? Femininity. What counts as femininity? Taking ballet or Ronda Rousey, UFC, winning a championship in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So in the book, I have a conversation with Ted. When I was doing my PhD at UNC Chapel Hill with Julia Wood, give yourself a score, there was a guy named Ted who was a Christian, and he was in this one class, and his mentor was teaching the class, and he was walking away from the faith. His parents were frantic and called me because they knew I was there doing my PhD. And they said, would you meet with him? And so I did meet with him, and it was very interesting to hear his objections to the Bible. He no longer believed it was inspired. He no longer believed Jesus rose from the dead. He no longer believed Jesus was God. So that's question number one, is tell me what you believe, and I won't get defensive as you tell me that. Second question is, but why do you believe this? And in all of that explanation, he said one comment that stood out to me. He said, my whole department believes like I do. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Having done all my education at a secular university, it really feels bad to be the outside person, right? Because you're a conservative Christian. So I'm not saying that all of his objections to the Bible were based on that, but you could hear in his voice that some of that had to do with what we call a sociology of a belief, which means I believe this for many reasons, not just intellectual, but now I have a group that I can belong to. Very important to get that background information. So ask these kind of questions when you're trying to figure out, hey, why do you believe these things that you believe? Your roommate, a family member. How did you and your family define vacation? We never went on a family vacation in the Muehlhoff household. We didn't have money. So we never went on vacation. So for me, a vacation isn't that important, but to my wife, it's very important, right? How did your family define family time? We all sat and watched TV and ate dinner. That's just what we did in our house. How did your family define commitment? How did your family use finances? How did your family approach debt? What counts as respect in your family? You never say no to my dad, ever. That just was not acceptable to say no to my dad. And if you did, the belt came out very quickly. By the way, to this day, I can be in a hotel room, speaking at a conference and just take my belt out of my pants, and I hear that sound. It's like a Vietnam flashback. I'm like, whoa, what? Whoa. No, I'm alone. I'm an adult. I'm safe. I'm in a hotel. No, I'm good. Wow, okay. What counts as spirituality? Are there any areas you've deviated from family rules or definitions? Very important to ask those kind of questions. Experiences, the experiences you've had in your life prime you to interpret reality. Very quickly, we won't do both of these. This is a very famous study, the picture of the woman lecturing. Men, it's a two-part study. Men are brought in and showed semi-pornographic and some pornographic movies. And then they go in and listen to a woman lecturing. She is dressed professionally and told, do not flirt with these men whatsoever. Speak almost from a masculine style. And the men were asked to rate her, and the men literally said, I was so surprised how seductive she was. I think that was kind of unprofessional, and she almost felt like she was flirting with me. Why? Because they had been primed for those experiences. So people are primed to react in certain ways. It's important for us to find out what was the priming mechanism that you've grown up with. We'll skip that. So when did you first start to think this way is so important to ask a person. So when did you first start to question the Bible? When did you first start to think Christianity was true? When did you first start to think homeschooling was the best option for school? When did you start to think that it would be better to be in a secular school? I mean, get the history of a person's convictions. What experiences have shaped your thinking? Looking back, is there a single event that has crystallized your conviction the most? Interesting to think that way. Culture absolutely impacts you, growing up in America, but also growing up in smaller cultures that have impacted your thinking. This is a horrible photograph, very famous. It's an African-American man being lynched, but I want you to notice the people smiling in the picture. Why? Because that's their culture. That's how they grew up. Now, we can rightly condemn that. But it would be silly not to find out the cultural influences of their racism. Because you'll never persuade people unless you understand the root causes of their thinking. Oh, let me say this. Noreen and I almost didn't get married because Noreen made a blunder in the Muehlhoff family. Here was the blunder. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. My dad worked for General Motors to the day he died. Right? So I want you to understand why it was blasphemy when Noreen came to meet the parents and she's driving a Toyota. Now, to fully understand my dad's comment, his comment was, lovely girl, what's up with the car? It's literally what he said. Now, to get that, I want you to watch one of the most famous commercials from the Super Bowl a couple years ago. let's go to Detroit. You know what I mean? But that's part of me. I mean, that is absolutely part of me. We're the murder capital of the world because we try hard. You know what I mean? Because there's not much more to be proud of in Detroit. But so that's part of my DNA. So when Noreen met my dad, he was semi-joking. Hey, we don't drive foreign cars. We drive American-made cars. But you have to understand the history of my dad to get that. By the way, I got into an argument with some people in college. I went to Eastern Michigan University. We're in the mall. We're about to walk into a store, but there's a picket line. I immediately stop. I said, guys, I can't do that. It's wrong to cross the picket line. They were like, what? Get out of here. We were going to the finish line. They said, no, man, we're going. I said, okay, you can go, but that's wrong, man. You just don't do that. They're like, that's stupid. And they all went in, and I stood as if there was a force field preventing me from going in. Why? Because my dad, when GM went on strike 2 times, he walked the picket line. And my dad looked at me and said, let me tell you a couple things about what a man is. A man, he shakes a person's hand, looks him right in the eye, and you never cross a picket line. You never cross. My dad was union his entire life. So you might look at me, by the way, if you just heard that, me say, listen, crossing a picket line is wrong, trying to bust a union is wrong, it would be crazy if we just let it exist on that level, right? And you now are arguing the merits of a picket line with me and the union, where I would say, okay, that's good to get that information, but question number 2 is, but hey, how did this become a conviction? And when you dig into my past, you realize, oh, your dad was union his entire life. Wow, duly noted. Your dad went on the picket line twice, right? And GM literally fed our family for months, right? Their trust fund for picketers. So then you realize, oh, okay, so this isn't just about the merits of a union or a picket line. This has a personal history for you, right? If we don't get that kind of information, then we're arguing on just one level, the intellectual level, and most times disagreements are not merely intellectual. Antonio Gramsci called that the intellectual's error. To think that things just existed on an intellectual level, that is not true about any conflict you have with a person. There's always an emotional, relational side to the conflict. So we could ask these questions. What was the community you grew up in? Tell me about it. What was it like? How has growing up in your particular town or community shaped your thinking? What were the strongest values of your community? Who is your present community that you belong to? Mine is Biola, right? The Biblical Institute of Los Angeles. What are the greatest values of your community? How does your present community shape your thinking? So let me conclude with a great quote from, it's my favorite Longfellow quote. And I'll be honest with you, it's my only Longfellow quote. Okay, but here it is. I love this quote. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each person's life enough sorrow and suffering to disarm all hostility. Boy, that's powerful. Right, so 4 questions you need to ask. What does this person believe? You get facts. You're not defensive. You're asking clarifying questions. Question number 2, but why is this your belief? Question number 3, where do we agree with each other? Always start with agreement, move towards disagreement. And then lastly, based on everything that I've just heard with this person at this time under these circumstances, what is one thing I should say? Not 5, not 10, but what is one thing to say? Hey, so I'm going to bring the panel up. Come on up, guys, and let me introduce them. First is Dr. Chris Grace. He is a professor of psychology and vice president of student development. Next is Dr. John Lunde, professor of biblical studies and tennis partner of Tim Muehlhoff. Dr. Arianna Molloy, the best new hire of the last 2 years at Biola. Are you kidding me? Associate Professor of Communication. And Doretha O'Quinn is Vice Provost, yes, of Multi-Ethnic and Cross-Cultural Engagement. So what an awesome panel to be able to have friends that you deeply respect to come up and just talk about your thoughts. And so let me start by just asking you, as you read parts of the book ahead of time and even listened to what I was saying, what are first impressions as you were listening to this, what I presented?
Buy it.
Oh, okay, we're done. Let's pray. Okay.
Yeah, first impressions. I do think that there's a lot to digest as you read this. Sometimes a book you'll read and you can kind of catch it and realize what it is. But I think, Tim, what you've done is you've captured something in here that could be real challenging for each of us. And just simply telling somebody for these 4 questions, that's great. But there's a lot there. In other words, to listen to another person about why they are, the way they are, it takes a lot of time and thought and preparation and a perspective that I think a lot of us are losing. We sometimes don't do that. So I guess the first thing I think of is there is a lot to digest in this, and it's very carefully thought through. So I was really impressed. It's a challenge to do that and to remind myself. And then as I read this, I thought, man, that's one area I could really work on. There was a faculty member here on campus, and I'd walk by his office, and every single time I did, there were students in there. And he was in there talking a line of students, and then he would, but there was also something very interesting when I went by his office. Every time I went by his office and saw these students in there, he was never talking, ever. He was just sitting there. And then I started realizing, so one day I asked him, I said, what do you do can you tell me about office hours? Because I was trying to shrink them to like 15 minutes. And I'd go, okay, what do you got? What's going on? Yeah, they're good. Okay, what next? Can I sign something? Get out of here, kind of thing. I know that sounds really bad, but that's what I was trying to. Could I really maybe get more students by going in only 10 minutes or 5 minutes? Because we can talk fast. Go now. You want a signature? Good. That's a good class. I'll take it. Yeah, good. And I watched this guy. His name is Dr. Paul Polstra, who retired from here. And it was the complete opposite. He sat and listened the whole time. And I asked him, I said, how do you do that? Why do you do that? How do you get and he said, well, and it was a challenge. And so every time I think about meeting and talking with somebody, I think about that very thing. How can I listen more? How can this be a time when God can be present? Because that's what Paul did. My friend, maybe Paul did in the Bible, but this is what Paul Polstra did. That's what Paul did, and he listened to students, and they were always there. And guess what? He taught statistics, and he was almost always recognized as one of the most favorite professors on campus.
Teaching statistics.
Statistics, because he had a line of students, because he listened to them, and he cared for them, and he heard them, and it deeply challenged me. And that's what this book, that's kind of, I'm like, I don't want to lose that. So that was one of my...
Remember what M. Scott Peck said? Scott Peck is a... I zoned out when you were talking, so I thought of this. No, M. Scott Peck wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled, and in it he has a very famous chapter saying the number one way to love a person, the number one way to love them is to listen to them, which I think was really profound, so thank you.
So I read this book when I was on an airplane, and I was one of those mental moments where I'm like, okay, I've got about 2.5 hours, how far can I get? And then by the end, it was like, oh my gosh, I don't want the plane to land because I want to keep reading it. But one of the many things that makes me excited about this book is that it's universal. You can apply it in a variety of ways. And it made me think, in particular, about a moment. I walk really hard in my shoes. People typically joke about the fact they can hear me when I'm coming around the corner because I walk hard. Maybe it's like a power pose kind of thing. And so I need to get my shoes resoled a lot. And so I take them to a particular place, and I took them in, and I let the guy know that I had an event that I needed to get to, and he said, oh, sure, you'll get them back in time. So I go on the day of the event to go pick up my shoes, and he doesn't have them done. Now, normally this would not be a big deal, but for whatever reason, I did not have patience that day, so I was like, wow, this is really unprofessional. I'm going to take my shoes and go somewhere else. So he apologizes and tells me to come back the next day. So I come back the next day, and it occurs to me I should maybe ask him how he's doing. Turns out his wife died.
Oh.
and he came in because he couldn't find anyone else to cover his small, very small business.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so reading your book made me remember that it's what you don't know that matters.
Ah.
You can never, ever, ever separate context from the person.
Yeah. Wow.
I think for me, this illustration or the story that was told, the story that was told about the man who wore the pink tutu.
Oh, yes. Oh, tell him the story.
And, okay, you would do that to me. I was engaging with this, okay? But that just, I couldn't go any further because I'm like, what depth of love. But it was about a gentleman who wore this pink tutu and was he running or?
Just taking pictures.
He
Yeah,
would-
taking pictures.
He would
Yeah.
travel all over the country
Yes.
and pack a pink tutu
Exactly.
and take a picture all over the place with bare-chested pink tutu and send it to his wife.
Exactly. And in my mind, you know, I'm not even connecting with there's something after that. I'm like, okay, come on now, really? Really? And then it gets to the part of where his wife actually has cancer.
Yeah.
And he took those pictures to send back to her. And just to really connect with where she was. And oftentimes, when we don't know the stories and we make assumptions before we engage with really what is happening, we miss powerful moments.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking of all the people who had all these assumptions, not knowing. A man loved his wife so much that whatever it took to keep her with a sense of knowing his love, hoping in his love, to the depth of that care. I mean, so I think about oftentimes in experiences when before we make these rash judgments or boxing folks in about what gives meaning to us as something weird or different or why is it done this way, it's so important to get to know the story. Because within the story, you can find yourself and you can find the depth of what really may be a place you haven't gone before. My husband's sitting here. Boy, I was thinking, would he put on a tutu, 6'5", you know? But you know, I know he loves me. And I know if it meant me having another day alive, whatever it takes. And so when I think about relationships and really, and when I think about even the book, it had a lot to do with looking in. Looking in. And so, and that's oftentimes, and it's not looking in with pride, but looking in with a desire to engage in the life of another.
I think that's what Dr. Molloy was saying as well, that until you learn that backstory, that we would have seen this man in this tutu taking a picture when we're in public, and we would have either ridiculed or thought judgmentally and run from that person rather than think about and then ask the question that lands, how are you doing and what's happening and why are you doing this? And that is the difference between somebody who is approaching people and withholding judgment and seeking to know why. And sometimes the answer is because he wants to wear a pink tutu and he's strange and weird, you know, and that's fine. That could have been, in this case,
There's a story behind that
there
too.
was a maybe not as compelling, but there's still a story, and that's the point, right? We still hear and listen, and that's why that is so powerful.
I remember hearing Jay Kessler, who was president of Taylor University at the time. He said, be kind to people. You do not know what pain they carry. And it gets to this whole thing. But what really, what I loved about the book is the whole, and this might not surprise some of you, covenantal nature of this.
And you get a point if you knew he was going to use that word.
That's right. The covenants in Scripture are always grounded in grace. The way God wins people's hearts is he precedes them in grace. And then he interacts with them and asks them to reflect his character. And as I was reading your book, and I was thinking about how you are teaching us how to attend, how to listen, how to respect, how to validate perspectives, even those that we disagree with. Yeah. Finding the aspects that we agree with. I mean, all the things that you do in the book. It struck me that what you're asking us to do is show grace to people before we engage them in terms of trying to bring about some kind of mutual understanding. You are engaging in a covenantal kind of a conversation where you precede everything else with grace, so that as people are listened to and as they experience our care, it drops the barriers. It's the kind of thing that God does with us all the time. And so that I began to think that this is very fundamental to what it means to bear his image and to engage in conversations that both communicate grace in terms of what we say, but exemplify grace. And usually it's the exemplification of grace that really wins the day. And then unity and the cessation of difficulties can really come.
I think that's what he mentioned too. What happened, what Paul did at Mars Hill in Acts 17, right? And you bring that illustration out as a biblical model for us when Paul seizes individuals that he is very strongly going to disagree with and not like what they're doing. This was, I'm sure, deeply troubling. And yet, to say to them, the way he opened this, men, and people, I could see by your behavior that you're very religious. Well, right there, he won, in essence. He watched, he paid attention, he heard, he saw, and he realized what would happen. And so I think that's it. That it's an amazing model for us to be able to pay attention to and see, how do we approach that person that we're going to disagree with. So
something else I have to interject that I was thinking about as we were talking is the concept of time. I'm a very time-oriented person when I'm thinking about what's going on, and one of the things that you hit really hard is the idea of empathy and how our skills of empathy have decreased. I think the statistic was 70%.
Yeah.
So 30 years ago, it was significantly more.
Yep.
And I was thinking about perhaps one of the reasons is the issue of time. I mean, from a workplace standpoint, dealing with conflict, the idea is to get it done quickly and efficiently and productively and move on.
Yeah.
So when you think about applying empathy and skills of perspective taking, it's going to take time. And I love that you sort of laid out a process for us to engage with that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we want to be efficient. I want to get this done for a multitude of reasons. I just want to get this done. Let's move on. And that doesn't, for some issues, that just doesn't work. It can't be done that quickly. One thing I wanted to comment, Chris, when you were, Dr. Quinn, when you were saying about the pink tutu, we have a term called cognitive complexity, which dictates this. If you only have one interpretation of a person's actions, even if that interpretation is correct, you're not cognitively complex. So if we had one interpretation of the man in the pink tutu, that he was an exhibitionist, who knows, that you're not complex. So to make ourselves step back and say, what would be the reasons that man was not being on professional with your shoes, to literally force ourselves and to say, what are more interpretations that could possibly be happening with this person? That's a real skill for us to be able to do, and it's often hard to do when our emotions get involved, for sure. Hey, let me throw out this question to you. So when you guys watched Bill O'Reilly and Geraldo go after each other, what did you pick up on, and what do you think has bled down to us seeing that on a regular basis, that kind of interaction on news programs and stuff like that? What did you observe, and how do you think it's affected us?
Well, one thing, it wasn't listening, that's for sure. I mean, talking at each other and not even giving a chance to, to process, to think about what each other were saying.
Yeah.
And even connecting, I mean, I saw it another time, and I just got mad because Fox News in my community is not one that I continue to enjoy hearing, but it just seems, that whole attack.
Yeah.
It's like and my question is, why are you so angry?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, anger is not going to foster good health. And honestly, it just wouldn't have surprised me if one of them would have had the big one. Just really because of the depth of life and blood with them.
Yep.
Because, I mean, it was like, it's my way or the highway. There was never, for me, that's what I saw. And it was just very frustrating because, there couldn't, I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent, where was there any opportunity to build relationship?
Yeah.
Dr. O'Quinn, that's interesting that you said that you felt angry watching that, because that's actually what an emotional contagion is. You're watching this and it makes you angry because you're mimicking and paring back exactly what they're doing on that. And to say that people enjoy this tells us a little bit about who's watching this, and that they enjoy that in some way, shape, or form is a little bit troubling. Yeah. Because it isn't effective. It isn't in any way, shape, or form something that's conducive to hearing or understanding, right? Yeah. And so, but people say that, that's how you get ahead. That's how you model. That's how you can do this. That's how you get your point across. Yeah. That's strength. That's, and instead to stop and say, what in the world have we come to when that is what we accept as the highest level? Yeah. And these guys have made it. They're considered way more knowledgeable and popular, whatever, by our world than anybody else who's rational. And they get, and it's scary, and it makes you mad because that's what a contagion does.
In one sense, it's like a loss of hope in terms of trying to come about to convincing the other. There's no way they were going to convince each other. It was only about getting their point across. Yeah. And I think what we've come to in America is a loss of hope that we can actually communicate in a way that would win other people. All it is now is just simply trying to be louder. Yep. And that's a bad place to be. We've lost the whole respect of each other and the humility that we might actually learn something from someone else. It's not a good situation. It could be really bad.
It made my heart beat faster, and I started to sweat. That was my immediate reaction. I was just like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And I was thinking about this idea of emotional contagion, and it's very similar to, like, I love the smell of campfire. But when you get too close to it, it's on your clothes and your hair and your skin, and it's there, and it's thick. And so I think that is what I think about when I'm around those types of interactions. But quite honestly, my other reaction was, I felt sorry for them. I thought somewhere in their life they don't feel heard, and somewhere in their life they've gotten addicted to the adrenaline high of hearing themselves talk.
Oh, wow.
And so I thought again in my own life, where am I hearing myself talk and not listening to other people?
I'm reading a book called, I forget the name of it, but Dallas Willard just passed away. He was the chair of USC's philosophy department, a Christian. He was the mentor of Dr. Muehlhoff here. And I'm reading the last book he was working on. It's a series of interviews. And a guy tells a story about being in a Dallas Willard class. And the student was taking on Dallas Willard and just really being hostile with him. And Dallas Willard wasn't defending himself necessarily. And so afterwards, the student, when the class was over, he went to Dallas Willard and said, Dr. Willard, you could have crushed him. His arguments were so weak. And this is what Dallas Willard said. He said, I'm practicing the spiritual discipline of not always having to have the last word. Yeah. And I thought, wow. I mean, as academics, we are not geared that way.
No.
I have the last word with a prezi. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. But Arianna, that's called priming. That primes us. So when you have a conversation with your friend after watching that, their mere disagreement with you, you've been primed to perceive it as an attack. Because you've watched that, now you're geared up, just like the guys watching pornography and watching a woman lecture, they immediately took the prior situation and applied it to the present. And I think we as Christians always feel like we're being attacked. And I think sometimes we're not being attacked, we're just being disagreed with, but we've primed ourselves to make everything an attack against us. And I think that makes us poor communicators in a lot of ways. Go ahead, John.
Well, I've just been increasingly convinced that it's not just the difficult conversations that we need to work on, it's the regular day-to-day conversations. And this actually is the same thing that we should be doing in those conversations. I was on I better make this as vague as possible. I was on a vacation where I was staying with relatives, and the entire time we were there, I don't think I had one question asked of me.
Oh.
I was just asking questions, listening, showing interest. I got fatigued until the point I didn't even want to engage anybody. And I began to realize I was in a very poor conversation pattern. Nobody was listening to anyone else. They just wanted to talk about what they said. And it dawned on me that so many conversations are that way. That's just simply talking at one another as opposed to really attending and listening. And I just was worn out by the end of that vacation, just so happy to leave. And I started thinking about the church. And if we could learn how to communicate with each other, having conversations that were like the model that you've actually described, just on the regular day-to-day stuff, it would empower people to be who God has called us to be. It would empower us to exhibit the kinds of fruits of the Spirit and ministry that would unleash the church. But I think so many in the church even are so lonely, and they're so lack of being heard, that they are sort of turned in on themselves, and they can't give because they have nothing. No one's investing in them.
There's a saying that is so critical in this for us, because we had a very similar experience. And we remember going over to somebody's house and being invited over, and at the end we drove away, and we realized that was really not fun. We didn't enjoy that at all. And as we dissected it, we realized because that's exactly what happened. It was as if we weren't there. There was no recognition. They just simply talked and talked and talked and talked and talked and talked, and we asked question after question after question after question, and we walked away feeling very unfulfilled, and we made a vow we were not going to do that. Yeah. We were going to be different, and we wanted ours when people came and when we interacted with them to try and learn more about them and so we always say this: it's better to be interested than interesting. People are always trying to be interesting in our presence, like, I want to be interesting, I want to try that, and it's better for you to be interested than interesting. If you want to get ahead, if you want to move forward, if you want to have good conversations with people, if you want to make friends, be interested. It's better to be understanding than to be understood. You take that one in a relationship, and that one will transform you. It's better to be understanding than to be understood. It's better to be interested.
Noreen and I felt so bad when you left. We felt so bad when you guys left. But we thought the Lundes were coming over. We thought so.
No,
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I absolutely resonate with that. I remember back when my wife and I were in Chicago, and I was in grad school there. We made a couple friend over there, and we went over to their house one evening. And we experienced this kind of communication almost for the first time in our lives. And when we were driving home, and we were just looking at each other, just feeling so empowered and so just valued. And for the first time in my life, I experienced what good communication patterns really does to one. And we then also had the same commitment. We wanted to be life givers, as opposed to just draining and having everything coming toward us. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? In the book, I try to step on sacred toes. And I try to make the argument that what's making us bad listeners is technology. And so some comments about you guys, from you guys. How has technology affected you? And how do you think, as you interact with students, how has technology, by the way, did the Red Wings win? That's fine. How has technology affected students? And by the way, be thinking of questions. We're going to turn this over and absolutely invite you to ask some questions. We have some mics set up. But so how has technology affected you? And then how do you think it's affected students?
So I love coffee. Like, I love coffee. I like holding a cup of warm coffee like it's a little mini hug. It's just my friend. And so every day I go to the same coffee place before I'm on my way to work. And they know what I want there. So they just say, do you want it hot or do you want it cold? Because they know that I want, the double shot on ice with 2 pumps of white mocha and a splash of milk, or a hot drink. But I noticed going there that I forgot my phone in the car. And so I didn't have my phone to look at whatever you look at on your phone. And I looked around, and most of the people there were by themselves, but they were looking at their phone. And they started to look at me like I was a weirdo because I didn't have anything to look at. I felt ostracized in that particular coffee moment because I did not have the socially accepted form of attention.
Yeah.
And I thought, we're missing out.
Yeah.
We're missing out, and I think that it plays a major toll. I think technology can be great, but it is a tool, and we need to know how to use it well with integrity.
Yeah.
I will say, well, why don't you go ahead, and I'll do it.
No, I just think for me, technology keeps me repenting. I mean that because I know the day that I get up in the morning, get on my knees, look for my devotional time with God, and now it's like, okay, let me check. Let me see what the day's going to be like. Okay, what is it I need to make sure I remember and all of that. And when Facebook hit, oh gosh, I was just, this interpersonal person, I want to know where everybody. But when I was a principal back in the day, when you could just use a paddle right, I'm on Facebook and I have this student that tells me, I understand you're Dr. O'Quinn now, and I remember the heat to the seat, and you telling me it hurt me more than it hurt you. I think of you often, and all I thought about was, watch your back. He gonna be somewhere. Get off of this thing now. You don't want to talk to these people. And yet, I know it's it's a way we communicate, but I agree. We miss out on the human flesh, the human touch, and all. And then the first time I sent something in caps, I had no clue I was yelling at people. And someone sent me a text back and said, why are you so angry? I'm like, you're not tracking with me. I wanted to make sure the emphasis of what I'm not angry. I'm really not an angry person. But all these quick things, and someone said, oh, Dr. Quinn, you just need to be on Twitter. I don't want to know where you are. I want you to know where I am, what I'm doing. Give me some space, and then just as a professor, it's like, put it up, phone all of it. I need you here. And then I realized that's a mechanism very important. And it has its place, but coming to terms with what is it doing to us relationally.
Yeah.
So.
Our ability to be mindful, to be fully present in the moment. And I think it's given us an excuse to be rude. I remember Noreen, so I have 3 boys. Sports Center is on all the time. You don't really get Sports Center until you've watched it the 3rd time. The nuances of the stories. So my wife is talking to me about something fairly intimate, right? I think I realized as a child I was abducted by aliens, okay, And I'm looking at her, and the music comes on. I'm looking at my wife, the music comes on, and I'm literally saying to myself, don't do this. I'm looking at her and I'm going, and it does not even matter what's on. Yiddish shuffleboarding. And I'm like, oh, hang on, Ann, I want to see if Jan gets the red one. Just hang on. And I wish I was kidding. I wish I was kidding. So we're losing the ability to be able to focus at one time. And John, it'd be interesting to comment on the spiritual practice of meditation, if that's infringing on our ability to meditate, which I wonder.
Yeah. Noreen, if I were you, I would put up a picket line in your house and say, boy, you ain't crossing that line.
By the way, there would be some reasons I would cross the picket line. Go ahead.
No, I think you're right. One of the things that students ask me frequently is how do you experience grace? And one of the most important ways you experience grace is you attend to the scriptures. You attend to what's going on in the narrative of the Gospels or whatever narrative or epistle you're reading, and attend in such a way that you are receiving something. But you can't do that if you're distracted. It takes concentration, and in most cases a good amount of time. But as you attend to the scriptures, now you're listening, and it's the means by which I think we receive grace through the scriptures. And if we've lost that ability, it's devastating. It really is.
Yeah.
No.
I was just going to say that I've actually stopped using my phone as an alarm in the morning. Because what was happening was my phone would wake me up, and then I'd see that I had messages, and so I'd check them before I even had time to think about the fact that today was the day the Lord had made, which sounds really cheesy, but that was where I was going with that. And so I purchased an old school alarm, and I still have my phone alarm on as like backup, just because that's the way I think, like I need a backup. But I've now taken time to turn my alarm off, and before I reach for my phone, say, Lord, this is your day. Use me, direct me, help me to see what you see. And just 10 seconds changes the way that I operate.
And I fell into the same trap. I like to listen. John Back introduced me to Pray As You Go. These wonderful meditative, they're only about 15 minutes long, but it's awesome. But I would have to use my laptop to do it. So I'd get up in the morning, I would turn this on. It's only about 10, 11, 15 minutes. But literally, as that time is going down, I am itching for that to be over because my computer is already open and I'm off to email. And once I get to that riptide of email, you're gone. So I literally stopped doing Pray As You Go as my first thing because my computer was now open. I seriously need to have time with the Lord with my computer in another room off because it's just too tempting to check out different things. So I thought that was a trap, almost like your phone. I got squeezed into it.
Yeah. I think another thing that it also heightens conflict.
Oh.
And the reason it was so funny yesterday, a couple of days ago, my husband's phone just stopped, and I was just real happy. And, because that's my time sometimes. But the phone or the scores of the game and all of that. But, it's not mean-spirited at all. But yesterday, and he had just gotten another phone. And yesterday, I was coming out, I saw one of the other professors, and I was here a little bit later. And I couldn't remember if I asked him to pick me up over here or pick me up over there. And then I started thinking, oh my God, he needs his, I need his phone. He needs his phone. He needs to know where I am. It just
You're right.
My own
You're right.
sense of safety. And he's just had surgery. And I'm thinking, okay, boy, he's got a hip replacement. What happened? He's driving and my new car. And so, but it just took me to multiple places that not having it. And it's like,
I know.
that dependency. And I was talking to Nancy Duvall, and she said, what do we do without them? What do we do without the phones?
That's right.
We talked. We engaged. We had time. We just, but we need it now. I wish I would have invented it though.
Well, and we're
I'm sorry.
I mean, the worst day I can have is when I'm driving on Imperial coming from Brea to here, and I could be praying about anything, social justice,
Yeah.
and I suddenly realize, oh, I don't have my phone.
Yeah.
Oh no, I don't have my phone. And the Holy Spirit's saying, what about the poor? I don't have my phone. Look, a person with a sign that says, I want to know Jesus, but I don't have my phone. It really disturbs me. I call Noreen from a landline. What are we, Dark Ages? And I'm like, honey, you gotta bring my phone. Okay, I'll bring your phone. I mean, it really bothers me. And what is with that? That's not good. Something not good about that. John, I'm curious what you're thinking. Your specialty. Some of the most bitter disagreements we can see is in theology, unfortunately, right? Where we feel so passionate about the things of God that we almost have an excuse now to we're just trumpeting our cause because this is biblical and I'm defending what the scripture teaches. And what have you noticed about biblical disagreements that almost the gloves come off very quickly when we're talking about scriptural issues?
Yeah, one of the things that I thought when you let out with, when you said we're so used to now communicating conclusions as opposed to how we got there, that's really true of my discipline, and it's unfortunate. Academics tend to have thought about these things a long time, and they've come to their conclusions, and they're so convinced of their conclusions that they don't want to have the process by which they got to those conclusions questioned. And so all too often, communication between academics in my discipline are about slamming each other with conclusions. So that's where I thought that was an excellent observation, and has made me more interested than ever to try to engage people on methodology and prior assumptions that they approach the question through, so that I can understand how they've come there. Even though I likely won't be convinced, at least I understand my colleagues and they understand me, and that allows us to also talk about the Bears and the Vikings. I mean, it enables all the ranges.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that when that starts to break down, I mean, you talk about phatic communication in the book.
Explain what that is, because I think that this is a great point you're making, what phatic is.
Well, we all know what emphatic means. It's exaggerated, it's stressed, and all that stuff. So phatic means just the day-to-day mundane communication that you might have with people, and how important that kind of communication is to set up the significant conversations. And I think that's wonderful, but I also have noticed that when these significant conversations break down, and you can't make any headway in terms of having quality, that all you have left is phatic, and so you're reduced to a very, very minimal kind of conversation pattern, and then the relationship grows stale, and it's unfortunate, but I've seen it happen.
Small conversations set up big ones. If all you're having is the big ones, if every time you're with that person it's this, right? You can't sustain that. You're going to avoid that person. You're going to, right? So you've got to augment the really emphatic conversations with your parents or roommate. You've got to have the goofy stuff. You've got to have the small interaction and asking about things and joking about things, because if that's not present and all you have, and by the way, welcome to the culture wars where we don't have any interaction with each other. Right? All we do is this. With non-Christians, with the gay community, with anybody is this. We no longer have any commonality or time in which we're just doing common things together. And when I was in grad school with people who really disagreed with me, and we could have that all day long, we would joke about things. We talk about the Oscars. You'd go to an Oscar party. You'd talk about something else other than the thing that you're disagreeing about is really important, and we often lose that perspective, and it gets pretty nasty pretty quickly. Go ahead, John.
Well, I just also wanted to say that New Testament theology has also helped me on these kinds of things, because when you are dealing at least with a brother or sister in the Lord, with whom you really have difficulty, and sometimes you do have to sort of eventually back off if the communication climate is poor. What I've been recently really being encouraged by is this notion of inaugurated eschatology, the whole notion that there's going to be a day when I will be wholehearted, and so will my colleague be wholehearted, and I will find nothing displeasing in my colleague, and my colleague will find nothing displeasing in me, so that I actually am in those contexts where I'm not experiencing hope. I have hope now.
That's good.
And I can actually have patience, and because I know one day we are going to have great communication. So there's patience, actually, that's coming into my life in those situations that are not very good.
That's really good. Hey, let's take some questions from the audience. We have Mark. Are you going to run the mic, or are we just going to have people go and... What's that? Yeah, we'll run. Oh, you'll run around? Okay, if we have any... Do we have any questions? Just raise your hand, and Mark will get it to you. Oh, right there. All right, awesome. Yeah. Hey, let me share a quote as we run the mic. John, talking about theological disagreements, a quote I came across that's stuck in the book. A Baptist said of an Episcopalian, "I can't listen to you because of what I expect you to say." Isn't that good? So I don't even listen to you because I know your position and I already know what you're going to say, but you haven't already said it. It's crazy. Yeah, comment from the crowd.
Oh, a question.
Okay.
Actually, it's kind of on that. I have a hard time listening to people and at the same time staying faithful to my convictions. So, for example, if I'm coming up to someone, I've talked to atheists that are so much smarter and more knowledgeable than I am, and I don't want to be swayed by every person that's a better communicator and change my beliefs constantly. But at the same time, when I come to conversations where I'm grounded in what I want to think, I have a hard time listening to them at all. So how do you find that balance between going whatever way and still being open to hearing people?
It's a really good question. Anybody want to jump in?
Anybody have another question? Maybe sometimes it comes down to a little bit, you make a decision as to what you want out of this particular relationship, and you have a goal in it. Does that make sense? It's going to vary depending upon what level and who this person is. If it's somebody you just met one time, you're probably going to have a different interaction with them. If this is somebody you have been praying for and talking with, and then that approach is going to be a little bit different, right? And so in cases, sometimes it depends a little bit on that relationship and on the context and what's happening there. What you guys are learning here at Biola is amazing. 30 units of Bible. Don't underestimate how good and how knowledgeable you are at much of this. And I think most of us have been trained, at least probably in all of our levels at non-Christian institutions, or a lot of us, I think.
SPU.
Yeah, like I said. And so when... But all that to say, getting off point here, I'm sorry. But the idea is you really have to think through, what's my goal in this relationship I've been praying for? And is that, I don't know if that's getting at it, but sometimes there's a different way that we would approach this.
And I would add one thing. So in the book, I chart a conversation with a guy named Mark, who was a Christian PhD student, thought he was strong enough to sit under a guy named Bart Ehrman, who John is familiar with, who is very persuasive in his discounting of the Bible and Christianity. He thought he was strong enough to sit underneath it, and he wasn't. So I would want to affirm, if you do know there's certain things that you're weak at, then be careful how much you engage a person who's particularly strong in it, but don't stay in that condition of weakness. Over time, develop that apologetic muscle and know more why you believe things so you can engage in those. But we do have to have a defensive mechanism a little bit to know it's not good for me to be at this kind of party. It's not good for me to watch these kind of movies. And it might not be good to engage certain people who you feel like you don't quite have the defenses and they are negatively influencing you. So obviously it's discernment, but know what your weaknesses are and try to attend to those even while you're here at Biola. Go ahead.
If I could say also, in the process of that knowing, don't allow what might frustrate you to categorize the person's worth and value. Don't equate that with where you differ. Because oftentimes that just continually breaks down any opportunities. And I really, 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 really believe that we never meet anyone by accident. And there's it's purposed when we're believers. And so encountering, I agree with him, getting that apologetic muscle strong, but don't let it define how you might still care for that person, because they've got a story of how they got to where they are.
Yeah.
I think also you have to sort of figure out where your heart is at when you're in that conversation. So it makes me think of this 2-week Christian leadership conference thing I went to, and I was all amped up because I knew everything and it made sense and it was clear. And I ran into someone who was not a Christian, and he was asking me questions, and I was like, well, surely I can win this conversation. And like very readily he was winning the conversation. And I felt like a fool at the end. And I realized that I was going into it with a lot of ego rather than a desire to sort of talk things out. I think the other thing is we can spend so much time conversing, which is a form of intimacy building, and not so much time living life together. So demonstrating what we believe in those actions. So this makes me think of another instance in which I was in a car with a friend who was an atheist. I hadn't really talked too much about my faith, but he knew that I was a Christian. And I got a phone call, and my friend was asking me to pray with her over the phone. And I thought, oh my gosh, what do I do? So I just said, I'm so sorry, I need to just take care of this. So I prayed with her over the phone really quickly. And afterwards I said, I'm sorry if that made you uncomfortable. And he said, no, I actually felt really peaceful.
Oh, wow.
And that opened up a very normal conversation.
Yeah.
I also think that you need to remember that the gospel is foolishness, and will be foolish to some people. And if we want to try to look intelligent every time in every conversation, most likely we will be unfaithful to the gospel at some point. So if you're going to be an ambassador for Christ, you're going to have to be able to get used to being scoffed at times by people who may think you are an idiot. I remember my father-in-law, who was a vice principal up in the school district in Seattle, highly respected professional. But he was in a conversation one time with one of his teachers, and it came out that he actually believed in creation as opposed to evolution. And this teacher, who respected my father-in-law so highly, was devastated, and she looked at my father-in-law and said, Howard, I thought you were so intelligent. And there was no way for him to sort of change that impression.
Yeah.
Because that's the nature of his convictions, and it will make you a fool. But read 1 Corinthians 1-3. What is foolishness to the Greeks and what is a stumbling block to the Jews is the wisdom of God. And if we remove the foolishness, and if we remove the offense of the gospel, most likely we've removed the opportunity for them to be offended enough to be open to grace.
Very much so. Yeah.
So I do think you need to keep that in mind.
Do we have another question? Yeah, great.
Hi. My question more has to do with family communication. And is there ever a point where you're in discussion with someone, a family member, and you're just in a high point of contention, and no matter what, or if you approach it the right way from your perspective, or I guess the right patient way to handle an argument, but it just is there any moment that you're just gonna have to say, okay, this is not going to work because of the other person?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt. So, Chris, maybe talk about timeout. So, if you're in a negative spiral, if it starts to go south and you're doing everything perfectly, what you think is perfect, it takes two people to have a civil conversation. It takes both people to do that. So if you feel like it's starting to go south, it might be good to do something that psychologists talk about. And why don't you explain that timeout? And
let me ask you this follow-up question real quick. Are you talking about a long-standing thing or just in the heat of the moment? Oh, the microphone left. But there. Okay, yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Is it this a long-standing thing that's going on over and over and over again, and you just you're going to and you keep butting heads, or is this like in the heat of the moment there are going to be times like that where you're both kind of physiologically aroused and stressed out?
This is definitely like a long-standing.
Yeah.
It happens over and over and over, no matter what.
Now we're talking communication climate, but yeah.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, let me just say, then, is that you, Leanne?
No.
Is it Portugal? No,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. You're so far away. By the way, you can come join us if.
I had a job and I was supposed to be by the door.
No? No, let me say this. If it's a long-standing feud, if this has been going on for a while, we're now talking about climate issues. Everybody has a climate. As soon as you talk to a person, a communication climate is created, which is made out of respect, acknowledgement, expectations, and commitment. So my advice to you is I would not engage that person about that issue until you improve the overall climate, because it will continually happen what you're describing. The climate is not conducive to this kind of conversation. So first, take care of the climate, improve it as much as possible, and then return to these kind of conversations. So again, respect, acknowledgement, commitment, reaffirm those things as much as possible and see if the climate can be improved.
And I would just add one to that, which is very similar. Listen, this is what life is going to happen to us at all times. We are simply unique individuals created by God differently, with different personalities, different interests, different backgrounds, different values, different things. And so guess what? We are finding around 69-70% of all conflicts that you're going to have in a relationship like in marriage is going to be perpetual. It's not going to be solved. My wife and I, we've been married 27 years happily. We will never agree on money, ever. It's just that way we are, but we don't argue about it anymore in a way that conflict comes into play. Instead, because we've chosen to do something, we've chosen to understand what this means for each other. So here's one piece of advice. If you're at loggerheads, go check your heart and find out what the issue really is about that's hidden and fueling the event that you're arguing about. Go find out what that issue is deep down. Use this information, Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. It helps me when and in perpetual conflict, and we can't get past it. I say, God, use this. Show me what's going on in here. What is this deeper issue going on in my heart that this is about, that might be fueling this? Because we might be arguing about this, but it's really about something deeper. Learn from that. Take that as advice. Figure out, God, what are you wanting me to do to change? What do you want about me? What's hard with my life? What's my perspective? And through that, you hope and pray that you make an agreement and a commitment with somebody to say they will do the same thing. But I know in relationships it's really hard to do, but that yeah, okay. She's like, oh, good one for that.
Another question? Yeah, we have one down here. That's why I put a chapter in the book on spiritual disciplines. You can know the right thing to do, but not have the spiritual wherewithal to do it. Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can word this correctly. Say you have like a really positive relationship with like a family member and you're close with them and the communication climate is super positive, but you know that there's an issue that they are really shameful or guilty about that you just never talk about, and maybe they don't know that you know. How do you confront with approaching that subject and creating a climate where they feel comfortable to maybe talk about something that's so painful for them?
The book of Proverbs says, a word spoken in the right circumstances compares it to fine jewelry. So I would say, a good climate is not just an end result. You want to use the good climate to address issues. So I would say you're in a pretty good place if the climate really is as strong as what you're describing. I then would seek to bring it up. And from there, it's discernment. Because that might hurt the climate. It might start to go south. But it's okay for it to go south a little bit because you've built up some good capital. So I would broach the subject.
How?
How
you just bring it up? Like,
yeah,
hey,
how to
by
do
the
it?
way.
Okay. I would say, and you guys can jump in, I would affirm the relationship and say, because I care for you, because I care about this relationship, I care about you, I want to bring up an issue that you have the freedom not to talk about. And here's the issue. And then don't push that person to do it. You don't want to manipulate them. But I would say you have the freedom not to, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk about it because I think it would be good. Then I'd bring it, we call that offering an invitation. A person can decline the invitation. And so I would offer it and then take your cue from that.
I would also question and check, God, what's going on with me? What is this about? What is happening in me that I want to do this? First of all, so pause, pray, make sure God is there and around and ponder this very thing before you move forward, right? Then at that point, check your heart, check your motive to see if it truly is for this person's edification, if it will truly help them, if there truly is something going on here. They will most likely sense that in you. And you do that with this humility and this, I love you, I care for you. Can we just talk about something that's really, really hard? Most of the time, when somebody does it, it almost releases them and frees them. They probably desire, maybe in that long, to talk to somebody about this. And you're providing that, and then you're saying to them, I'm so committed to you that I'm going to love you and care for you in this regardless, and I'm just going to pray for you. And that just, so coverage in prayer, but that's one thing.
Yeah, I think you need to take very seriously your stewardship of the grace of God, and that sometimes grace will be mediated through a person as opposed to simply straight from Scripture. And so if you don't talk to that person, there might be a logjam with their experience of the grace of God, and they'll sit with that for years, and it'll be like dry rot in their soul. So taking the risk, as Tim and Chris had talked about, to bring it up, is possibly one of the most important things that you could do, and then recognize that you are mediating grace. It's one of the most important things that parents discover, that they embody God's grace to their children, and as they can learn to communicate in ways that remove the shame. That's one of the most vital things that a parent can do, and one of the most vital things as a sibling can do. So I would encourage you to do that and trust the grace of God.
Thank you. Also, I just wanted to say how lovely that your heart would be burdened for this person. That's part of listening from the beginning, is being mindful of that. And I know that we often get so distracted with wanting to say the right thing that we don't say anything. And studies show that that's usually the worst thing to do, is to not say anything. So having the courage, I think C.S. Lewis said,
See?
courage
we can go home now.
is the highest virtue at the point
Yeah.
of testing, or something like that.
Yeah.
That we have to have that courage, and then it's okay if you don't say it right. It's usually better to say something than nothing at all.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
We have somebody over. We have. Oh, yeah.
Last question.
Oh, let's do two more, Mark.
Two more. We'll do two more.
Two more.
There's one right here, and then one right behind.
And then we have one over there. Let's have a sleepover.
No.
No. No. Where is it? Oh.
Right here.
Hey.
A couple of you guys mentioned being invited in a situation where someone wanted to spend time with you but really didn't engage with you, and they were the ones talking the entire time. Sometimes I know for me it can be like with someone that's close to you or your family, so you can't avoid that. So what would you do in that situation? Because obviously you can't just cut off connection.
If you figure it out, tell me, because it's really, really difficult. But I am realizing I'm going to have one of those conversations on this issue because it's becoming so blatant and so hurtful that we don't even want to go there anymore. We don't want to visit them anymore. And so I'm realizing in order to salvage the relationship and give it a new start, I'm going to have that conversation. And I've been putting it off for a couple of years, actually. But no, I know I have to do it. But all of what we just said about that difficult conversation applies to this.
Yeah, I think the other thing you can do is you're going to have to lower your expectations, obviously, and just realize, maybe this is the way this is going to be, and I'm going to need to find that which I'm looking for to be heard, to be understood, to be thought of, to be thought interesting. I may have to find that from somebody else, and to know, you just kind of say, this is where this person is maybe in life at this time, and maybe Lord used this and redeemed this time. And I don't know, and I think what John said is, and you pray about it and go for it, and sometimes you bulldoze your way through. Say, you know what, I'm going to talk to you about me right now. And I want you to listen to something, and maybe you just hit them head on and say, by the way, you haven't listened to me yet. Oh, I want to tell you something right now. Or, I don't know. That'll go over real well, I'm sure. But it's hard, man, right? I mean, it's not fun, and it sometimes takes those conversations, and I don't know, it's just hard.
Conversational narcissists, there's a term
Yeah.
for that very reason. And
Yeah.
so this makes me think of Andy Stanley's discussion of fixable problems versus manageable problems. Fixable problems we can pursue because we know at the end of the day they're going to go away eventually. But manageable problems are ones that will never go away, and we have to figure out how to adapt and create new boundaries. And most of the time, people problems are the manageable problems. So I know for me with people like that, I've had to decide I'm not going to get my needs met with them, but also I just spend less time with them. I still spend time with them. I just know it's going to be a little bit less.
Yeah.
It might be good for you to try to find the backstory. Some of the stuff that we started with tonight. In the particular situation I'm dealing with, it used to be better. We used to have a great time together, and something has changed over the years, and likely, I need to find out what that pain is in order to change the climate. So here I'm being offended, my wife and I are being offended, and so that's causing us to recoil, when actually the only hope for this is to find out what's really behind their dysfunction. So you might want to go about it that way and see if you can understand the backstory.
I have kind of a similar question, but how do you approach somebody who is a fellow believer, and it's not like a stranger or anything, like somebody that you come into contact with, about like a cultural issue where you don't necessarily want to be understood for yourself, but you want that person to understand, or not just, you want people to understand cultures that are different from you, and they're kind of not willing to. And so, and it's, like not just kind of like the video, like you don't want to just like go back and forth and be like, well, I'm going to defend mine and you defend yours. But as a believer, like, and a fellow, brother or sister in Christ, like you want to be able to exchange effectively, and it doesn't just seem effective. And so then you kind of do come to that where you're like, not going anywhere. And so I guess how would you communicate with somebody like that?
Because of, yeah.
Are you pointing at me, Chris? Chris. Wow, you talk about my life. But at the end of the day, I have to think about why this relationship? Why do I want that to be known? Why is it important? What's the motivation behind why it's so important? Now, one of the things I think is very important is that we are all children of God, and we are all created in His image. And the outside or the cultural differences and the backgrounds and all, when there is an opportunity, if we think about we want to be educated, we want to grow, and I often say, it's hard to know a person when you don't eat with them.
Oh, that's
you
good.
build relationships over eating together. And you may think that's strange, but see, eating food breaks down barriers. And also to understand that, I think what's important with me, when I think of that, because I lived that, I have to understand who I am and what I bring, and to celebrate that, and to be confident in that. And the fact that, and my mother told me this years ago, in an experience, that very thing. Mom, why don't, and I'm from the South, right? And so deep Jim Crow, black, white, that's my era, right? And my mother said to me, a person who doesn't want to get to know you, that's their loss. And she even said, your gain. And it's like, my gain, you know, well, I could be proud about that. No, it just affirms more and more you to understand how special and important you are. And she looked at me and she said, because you are my child, and because you matter to me. There is something that you have to resolve. It's unfortunate because that's what divides us in the kingdom. So often, meaning is made before we engage in relationship, before we know each other's story. And so it's so important, and really that's where food comes, because it just kind of breaks down walls and barriers. And you talk some about, breaks down those walls to cause us to enter into relationship. And the truth is, sweetheart, you don't have to press for those two who may not want to know you. It's sad, but when you value who you are, and I'm just not saying it to you, I'm saying it to everybody. I am so convinced by Psalms 139. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are the works of God's hand. And I have to think that about every one of my brothers and sisters, and not let what they may not want to engage in defeat that we are kingdom builders and we're going to press into this. Because there's a lot of things, like you said, people didn't know about walking across that line, but your Father had put something in you that you could stand against. And there are experiences in all of us that is so important for us to realize, if I just took the time to know you, how much richer I am for it. So it's important that you know, even rejection, you can't take that personal. You can't. You have to realize, this is who I am. I want you to know me. I want to get to know you. Sometimes people aren't ready because they're bringing their story and their baggage and all the other stuff. But I'm going to love you through it in spite of. So.
Thank you.
Amen. Hey, let's hear it for the panel. Great job, guys.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.